In this video, you're gonna learn variables and data types in Python because those are the core fundamentals you gotta start out with if you're just learning how to code. And this is gonna be my first video in the playlist. The other ones in the playlist are gonna get more and more advanced. So stay tuned for those videos. Stick to the end of this video because I'm gonna share you a practice problem where you can apply what you've learned in this whole video. So let's get into it. All right. I'm gonna be using VS Code throughout the whole video, and you can follow along. I'm gonna put the code in the description below. And yeah, let's get right into the first topic of this video, which is variables. And so what are variables? Well, variables are, basically think of it as a container. Think of it as a container that stores information. It can be any kind of information like numbers, text, Booleans, and I'm gonna be talking about more on that later in this video. And we can name a variable, so we can give our container, a name. And it has to be a valid name in Python. So some examples of valid names are like num equals 5, x, and then it could be anything with underscores in it, but you can't have a space in a variable because then it's gonna throw an error. It has to be all in one word. And so if you want to separate, a common thing in Python standard convention is to name your variables with an underscore if there's multiple words in that variable. So for example, if I want to say my score, then I put an underscore in between the two words to tell Python that, or not to tell Python, to tell you that it's just a more clear way of seeing the different words in the variable. And this is completely valid. This is a completely valid variable name. And there's also, this isn't as common in Python, but there's also something called camel case, where you could do something like my score something something something. And so the first word starts with a lowercase letter, the rest of the words all start in uppercase letters. But I'm gonna stick with the standard Python convention, which is just underscores. And so I'm gonna give my variable name, which is, I'm gonna call it my underscore num, and just say 5. So now this container now stores a value of 5. And the nice thing about variables is that I could keep calling that container. If I keep calling it by its name, then I can have access to whatever information is stored in that container. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm gonna say print my num, and when I run that, if I run that, then it's gonna, on the console, it's gonna show me the value of this container. In this case, it's just 5. So you can see 5 over here. And what print does is it's a built-in function in Python, and anything that you pass in the arguments is basically gonna be printed out in the console. And later in the video, I'm gonna be talking about how you can combine multiple variables to print out more complex things on the console. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the 4 main data types in Python, which are integers and floats, and there's also strings, and there's also Booleans. And so I'm going to start with integers and floats. An integer is basically is any number that's positive or negative. So it could be, for example, it could be like 5, 0, -5, -10, whatever you name it, you get the idea. Floats, on the other hand, is going to be, floats is any number with a decimal. So it's going to be like 5.0, 0.0, 2.9, -10.0. I'm just making up random numbers, but you get the general idea. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with integers and floats in Python, because you can do a lot of cool operations. And the basic ones are just adding values. So you can say print 5 plus 5. And I'm just going to comment this line out first so that I only run this line of code. So if I run 5 plus 5, then that's going to run, if I run that, it's going to give me 10. And I could also say 5.0 plus 5, but if I do that, then it's going to return me a float, or it's going to print out a float, because whenever we have an integer, whenever we have an operation involving a float and an integer, then it's going to return an integer or a float. So, or the exception is if I do, the exception to this is if I do division. So if I do division with 2 integers, then that's going to give me a float. So if I run that, 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, and that's returning me a float, even though there's just 2 integers involved in this operation. And there's a lot more complex things we could do. We can say 5//2, and this is going to give me the integer division of this. It's gonna, or this / is basically integer division, which is basically truncates anything after the decimal point. And so it doesn't round up, it just gets rid of the whole decimal number. So it's gonna give me 2. And there's also modulo, which is the percent sign, and this is going to give me the remainder of value. And so 5 divided by 4, if I did 5//4, this would give me 1, because that's the whole number of the division operation. If I do mod 4, it's also going to give me 1 in this case, because it turns out that the remainder is also 1. But if I did 5 mod 5, then that would give me 0, because 5 is divisible by 5, so there is no remainder. And this modulo thing is helpful if you want to know if the number is even or odd. That's a really common problem that might show up in some kind of interview, so that's something to keep in mind. There's also strings, which are basically any sort of form of text, or it could be a number that's wrapped inside quotes. But the main thing about strings is that strings have to be wrapped around quotes, or double quotation mark, single quotation mark, doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent. So you can say print hello, that works. You can say print hello with double quotation mark, but you have to close it with another double quotation mark. That's gonna work, but something that won't work is if you do something like this, that. So it has single quotation mark and a double quotation mark, and they don't correspond with each other, so it's gonna give me an error. And something cool you can do with strings is you can concatenate strings in a print statement to display longer strings to the console. So what I can do is I can say, let's say I have a variable called my string is equal to Dylan, and then my last name is equal to song. And so I can say print, I just call this my first name. I'll say my first name and then plus my last name. And then we gotta make sure to add a space in between, because if I don't do this, then it's going to print out Dylan and song all in one word. This is basically putting a space in between the two strings. If I run that, then it's gonna give me Dylan song. And it's cool because you can see how advanced you can get with this. If you have a bunch of variables containing strings, you can display a really long string. And so another cool thing is you can do something called typecasting. which is where you convert let's say I have my age is equal to 19. This is an integer. And variables don't only have to be strings or numbers. It can be any other data type. But when it comes to a print statement, we have to convert this integer, in this case it's an integer variable, we have to convert that into a string for the print statement, for the program to display it. So I'm gonna say my first name and then is plus, and let's just see what happens if I do my age. Because you expect it to be Dylan is 19. If I run that though, it says that we have a type error because it can only concatenate string to a string. So that's the issue. We have to typecast this into a string so that we get, now this should work. So if I run that, now it's gonna give me Dylan is 19 because this integer, this my age variable which stores 19 is converted into a string just in this line of code. It's not permanently converted to a string. It's only converted into a string for this print statement. And the final data type that I'm gonna be talking about is Booleans. And so Booleans basically consist of two values, true or false. And you can store these Boolean values inside a variable because a variable can store any data type. So you can say my bool is equal to true, or you can also say this bool is equal to false. And so you can store Boolean into a variable, but in most cases you're going to be using Booleans when checking conditions inside an if statement, which I'm going to be talking about in a later video in this playlist. Alright, now here's a practice problem that I came up with. It's a pretty quick problem. It's basically asking you to come up with two variables, name and height in inches, and it wants you to print out a statement saying the name of the person and is blank feet and blank inches tall. So it wants you to split up the inches into feet and inches. So pause the video and think about what operations you need to do to solve this problem. Okay, so first I'm gonna say name is equal to, in this case I'll say Dylan, and then I'll say height inches is equal to 67. So there's 67 inches, but the problem is we want to split it up into feet and inches. So to do that, I'm gonna say print, and then I'm gonna say name, and then plus is plus, and then to get the amount, the number of feet, we have to do integer division. So that's going to be plus, and we have to also do string concatenation before we do this integer division. So I'm going to say 67 / 12. And so this is going to give me 5. 67 integer division of 12 is going to be 5, and it's going to convert the 5 into a string so that I can print it out. And then I'm going to say 5 feet, and then for the inches we just use a remainder. And I'm going to say string to typecast the integer to a string, and then I'm going to say 67 mod 12. And so this is going to give me 7 inches tall. And that's it. If I run that, hopefully we don't get an error. And it says we did get an error. Oh, it's because I forgot this plus. There we go. Let's see now. There we go. Okay. Dylan is 5 feet 7 inches tall. And yeah, that's basically this whole practice problem. Hopefully you got it right. Let me know how you did in the comments below. Alright, that's it for this whole video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, just the little small things that you do each day. It might not feel like much in the moment, but it's gonna pay off in the long run. So just keep coding, keep going at it, and I'll see you in the next one.